My subscribers ask me to make videos sometimes, and one of the most requested videos that I get is how to use the Red Book. So I'm going to give you a short introduction to how I use the Red Book and some of the really interesting information that you can find contained in it. If you're new to the channel, my name is Dub C. I want to thank you for joining me today, especially if you are kind of new to the idea of collecting coins and stacking precious metals. My channel is really kind of blending those two worlds. And if you're one of my returning subscribers, thank you guys as always. I'm going to ask you for your tips and your hints and how you use the Red Book down below. Hopefully for some of the newer folks out there, you can help contribute to their education also. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I'd like to ask you to go ahead and click on that subscription button, become part of the community. YouTube shows that only about 1 in 5 people who watch my videos are actually subscribed to the channel. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe. It's simply a way to show support. So if you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and click on that subscription button. And I like to begin my videos with a simple disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer you any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 30 or 40 years. I also like to begin my videos where I can with a couple of definitions, some terms that we can kind of fold back into the subject. That's really important when we're talking about the Red Book. There are 3 terms that we're going to use with some regularity when we're looking at coins. That is the idea of the mintage, the mint mark, and also the difference between a circulation or business strike and a proof. I'll take this pretty slowly. Remember, you can always pause the video and go back and rewatch parts of it. You can take notes if you need to, and by all means, you'll have the ability to ask me questions at the end of this video in case something's still not clear. So let's start with the top. The mintage is simply the number of pieces struck in a specific year at a specific mint or branch mint. The United States of America has our main mint located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but we also have mints located in San Francisco, California, and Denver, Colorado. We even have a very small mint that produces a lot of our bullion coinage in West Point, New York. But we've also had mints all over the country at different periods of time. Some of those are no longer in existence. Some of them have become museums, but we pay attention to the mint mark. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So the mintage is really just the number of pieces that are struck in any given year, but also a little bit more specifically, any year and at what branch mint or mint that they were struck. The mintage is the number of pieces made. So that mint mark, in the United States of America, the mint mark is usually 1 letter. Sometimes it's 2 letters, and that just denotes where the coin was struck. And often we find the mint mark next to the date. That's very helpful. Sometimes they're not located next to the date. We'll take a look at one of those a little bit later. But fortunately, the Red Book also tells us where to look to find that mint mark. And it's important to understand when you are pricing the value of a coin, that mint mark is very significant. That means just as much, in some cases even more, than the date of the coin. So when we're pricing the coin, we have to look at the date and the mint mark in conjunction. And then I said we talk about circulation or business strike versus proof. This is a little bit of a tricky concept if you're not used to it, but the United States of America and other countries around the world have made special coins for collectors for hundreds of years, and we call these proof coins. In the United States, we have a tradition of making proof coins that have highly mirrored reflective fields, and I'll show you an example in just a second. A proof coin is independent of the mintage of the business strikes. The business strikes are just the coins that were made for circulation, the kind of coins that you would find in your pocket change. Proof coins are legal tender coins in most circumstances, and sometimes we do find them in change. It's probably accidental that they get mixed in with change. But once you get used to a proof, you can definitely tell the difference. The main key point here is that those proofs are kept separate in terms of their mintage from the business strikes. So you can determine the value of a proof versus a business strike coin in some aspect by looking at the mintages. And I'll show you how the Red Book denotes the mintages of the proof coins compared to those circulation or business strikes. We have here a 1964 Kennedy half dollar. So you can see that this is really a pretty example of a Kennedy half dollar, but it doesn't have anything special to it other than the fact that this happens to be a silver half dollar. A very beautiful coin in its own right. It's in a high state of preservation, something we'll definitely talk about later in this video. But I want you to compare this business strike compared to a proof strike. This is a proof Kennedy half dollar. Can you see just how reflective these fields are? They're mirror-like. Now compare that again to the business strike. You can see that they are entirely different things. The proof is made for collectors. The business strike is actually made to circulate. So we'll take a look at that when we get a little bit deeper into this. That's the difference between a proof and a circulation or business strike coin. So what is the Red Book? This is really kind of an important idea to understand. The Red Book is really a price guide. You can take a look at just about any coin that's ever been made in the United States, and as long as you can figure out the date and the mint mark and the condition of the coin, the Red Book will give you a pretty good idea about how much that coin is worth. And I'll show you with some real world examples. The Red Book has been released since the 1940s. We're coming up on the 80th anniversary of the Red Book. It's produced every single year. But the nice thing about the Red Book is that you don't need to buy one every year. Some people do. I know that I do, and I actually collect some of the Red Books going back many, many years. These are some of the Red Books from when I was a kid. Probably doesn't surprise you to know that I'm a collector, right? But the Red Book comes in a large print format now, which is pretty nice for folks who have eyesight that's going a little bit, and they also have this typical spiral bound. The nice thing about the Red Book in terms of its price is that it's not very expensive. These run about 20 bucks a piece. It's a great way to show support for your local coin shop. They typically get these around the time that they were released every year, and you can buy from your local coin shop. It's a nice way to introduce yourself. If you're not familiar with your coin shop, tell them that you're just looking for a Red Book. Local bookstores sometimes have them. A place like Amazon will have them if you don't have those options. So it's a nice, affordable way to get some seriously detailed information about the hobby of coin collecting, and it also works really well for those of us who stack precious metals. Interestingly, the first 100 or so pages of the Red Book really deal with the very, very earliest coins that were struck in the North American continent. Those are sometimes called colonial issues. And while this is a very fascinating area to study, it doesn't really pertain that much to brand new coin collectors and stackers. Unless you really want to go off on that journey, which is fascinating. I am fascinated by these early pieces, but it's not the kind of thing that we really use on a regular basis. I keep a Red Book on my desk, and I'm using it several times a day, even in this information age when we have so much information at our fingertips in the form of a website. I still find myself referring to the Red Book many, many times a day. And the last probably 200 or 300 pages of the Red Book deal with territorial issues and also commemorative issues, some of the bullion issues the United States of America produces for those of us who stack precious metals. So that's also not really the kind of stuff that a typical collector would be using on a regular basis. If we narrow down just how much information is included in the Red Book, it really just does become a very easy to use, simple, concise book for even the newest collector to use. And again, I'll show you exactly what it means. Produced by Whitman Publishing. It is a wonderful publication that has information gleaned from some of the greatest minds in numismatics. So it really is a neat thing to do. Let's take a look at exactly how this works, right? It works. We'll talk about the mechanics of coin grading, because while we do need the mint mark and the date, we also need to kind of know the grade of your coin. How does coin grading work? I'll give you a really brief overview. Coin grading is essentially the quality or the condition of the coin based on the amount of wear the coin has received or how little wear the coin has received. We want a piece that has the least wear typically when we're collecting coins. So we have in the past, going back 100, 150, 200 years even, we assigned words to those areas of condition on a coin, and we call those the words that we use. That's an adjectival grade. Adjectival grade just means a word that takes the place of an adjective. In this case, the adjectival phrase is either one word or a couple of words. It sounds fancy, but you'll get used to it pretty quickly. We started grading coins based on that condition. So the lowest graded coin was called a basal state. Sometimes it was called a fair. Another one of the idiosyncrasies of coin grading is that sometimes the words don't really mean what we think they mean. You would think that a coin that was in fair condition would be okay. That's actually one of the lowest grades of the coin. And from there, we used words that expressed kind of an increasing amount of detail left on the coin. It would be maybe about good to very good to fine. to very fine to extremely fine, you're looking at kind of the words that we used to use to associate with coin grading. The problem with this old style coin grading system is that there were a huge number of qualities of coins within each one of those adjectival phrases. For example, if we're looking at something like the adjectival phrase of very fine, you could have a coin that was just barely in the very fine area, or a coin that really pushed to the very upper limit of very fine, and you would have a whole bunch of coins in between in almost a continuum. So if you went to a coin dealer and you said you wanted an example that was in very fine condition, what if he pulled out the least quality very fine coin that he had? And what if you had the very finest very fine and you wanted to sell it and they offered you the lowest quality price for that very fine range? It was not very specific. And then in the 1940s, we had an invention from a numismatist named William Sheldon, who came up with a numerical grading scale. He put everything on a scale of 1 to 70, with 1 being theoretically bad and 70 being theoretically good. And everything falls on the continuum in that gradation from 1 to 70. This was a huge improvement, and it allowed for much, much more precise grading. No longer did we have a great big range contained within just one of those adjectival phrases. But the problem is that those numbers were a little bit hard to remember also. So what we eventually wound up doing is we kind of overlaid Sheldon's 1 to 70 scale on those adjectival phrases, and that gave us a series of numbers within each of those adjectival phrases that kind of illustrates if you've got the lower end of the scale or the higher end of the scale. It sounds a little complicated, but once you get used to it, it really starts making sense. For example, instead of just the adjectival grade of very fine, now we have the mix of the adjectival phrase and Sheldon's grading scale, so the coins within that fall on the continuum of maybe 20 to 35. Those numbers all fall within that adjectival phrase of very fine. So now you see that if you've got a coin that's on the lower quality on that within that phrase, it could be a very fine 20. And if you had a really nice example that still kind of fell within that area, it can maybe be a very fine 35. It allows for a much more precise style of grading. Believe me, I'm going to show you some examples. It'll all start to make sense. We don't use every single number on the Sheldon grading scale. It's kind of an idiosyncrasy of coin grading. We may eventually get around to doing it, but right now when we're talking about things like very fine, we typically skip maybe 5 points per grade. So it might be a 20, a 25, a 30, and a 35. When we get into the higher grades, we do now at least concentrate on every single one of those digits. I mentioned that the Sheldon grading scale went up to 70, so the coins that grade from 60 to 70 fall within the adjectival grade of mint state. Those coins on that 11-point grading scale, we do look very closely at each one of those individual numbers. So there is an MS 60, a mint state 60, a mint state 61, a mint state 62, and so forth, all the way up until 70. So the higher graded coins typically has a little bit tighter grading scale. I know it's a little bit complicated and a little bit complex. Let me throw one more factor at you. Because remembering the very fine or the extremely fine or the uncirculated takes a little bit more to speak and it takes a little bit more to write, we've typically shortened those adjectival phrases to 1 or 2 letters. It's just a way to make it a little bit more shorthand. So instead of saying very fine 30, we would probably say VF 30. Again, it starts to make sense. So that's the concept of grading. And the nice thing about the Red Book is that it actually tells you how to grade your pieces when you're looking for the prices. We'll get to that in just a second. The other interesting thing and the easy thing to remember about the Red Book is that it goes in chronological order. So the earliest coins appear earlier in the book, and the later coins, the ones that have been released most recently, appear later within the series that you're looking at. And the red book is also organized in such a way that the coins go from the lowest denomination, that is the smallest face value, to the highest denomination, that is the most face value. So within each series, if you wanted to look at half dollars, you would look at the earliest half dollars and then it would go chronologically up until the latest half dollars. And we've got some examples I'll show you in just a second. So the red book is actually laid out pretty logically. It just gets, it takes a little bit of experience to get used to. Let's talk a little bit about grading, and I'll show you some examples in the real world. This is an example of a Morgan dollar. This is an 1881 Morgan dollar, and if you're looking at a Morgan dollar and you're not familiar with these, a great big circulating coin came out in 1878. We made these all the way up until 1921, and you might think, well, this is a pretty nice example of a Morgan dollar. I wouldn't argue. I think that this is actually a pretty nice example, but remember, when we're looking at the condition of a coin, the main thing that we're looking at is the amount of detail that remains from when the coin was first struck and first released. If it goes through circulation, eventually the highest points of the coin will wear down, and it's easy for us to kind of track the condition of the coin based on that wear. With the idea of the Morgan dollar, the red book will tell us exactly what to look for. So get a good look at this, and then I'm going to show you an example of an uncirculated Morgan dollar so you can compare. While this one is attractive, let's see just how nice an uncirculated example is. I should note here it's got nothing to do with the shininess of the coin, even though the coin on the left is a very, very shiny coin. I like to tell my subscribers and viewers, we don't clean coins. We never clean coins because collectors and dealers don't want clean coins. You can make this coin look shinier and brighter, but you can't restore the detail that has been lost due to circulation. And remember, it's the detail that counts. For the most part, collectors and dealers would rather have a dark, authentic, natural coin than one that has been clean and made bright and shiny, because you can't restore the detail, and that's what we're looking for. So look at the example here. This is an uncirculated example of a Morgan dollar, and you can see just how much more detail is left. We'll take a look at that in just a moment when we look inside the red book to see how it wants us to grade these pieces. And then the back is a great example too. You can see just how much more detail is left on the coin on the left versus the coin on the right. So we're going to look at the red book now. I'll introduce you to the red book, and we'll see just how it works and how it lets us grade this coin. I'll show you some real world examples too. We're opening up the red book, and again, we're skipping over the earliest coins. While they are fascinating, they're not what we're really after here. And then we go in order of the size of the coin, the denomination of the coin. Interestingly, the United States Mint has released all sorts of coins that we don't use anymore, like 3-cent pieces and 2-cent pieces. Again, fascinating area of discovery. That's not really what we're after here. We're going up to quarters, half dollars, and then up to silver dollars. You can see right there. So we flip through silver dollars chronologically, going through all of the earlier versions of the silver dollar until we get to what we're looking for, which is the Morgan dollar. And you can see it identifies it right there. So the first thing to note about how to use this guidebook is that it tells you where to look for that mint mark, right? That was the important thing that I wanted to get across when we talked about mint marks. Mint marks are every bit as important. And we'll take a look at that first. It says the mint mark location is below the wreath on the reverse or the back of the coin when it's present. Now, the mint in Philadelphia sometimes used a P for the mint mark, sometimes didn't use a mint mark at all. And that indicates that that coin was struck at the main mint in Philadelphia. So we're looking beneath the eagle's wings, beneath the wreath there, and we'll see if there is a mint mark on our coin. Well, look at that. Right there beneath the wreath, we see a very small O. So that's an indication that's the mint mark. That mint mark corresponds to New Orleans. So this coin was actually struck in New Orleans, Louisiana. So now we know the date. This coin is in 1881. And also, you should note that when you're handling a coin, let's try to hold it by the rims. My hands are meticulously clean before I start shooting a video, and I don't like to wear gloves in my videos. But you should always try to hold the coin by the edges so you're not getting fingerprints and smudges on it. An 1881 Morgan dollar, we've got the date, and we know that it was struck in New Orleans. So now we know the date, the mint mark. All we need to do is find out the condition of this coin. And the red book will tell us exactly how to do that. It's got a list of the conditions of the coin. Now note that we said that some of these go all the way down to 1 on that Sheldon grading scale. You can see 20, 40, 50, 60, and onwards. These coins typically, when the red book doesn't have the lower grades, it means those coins may be okay for a coin collector. But this series in particular, the collectors are going to want to find a piece that really starts in the 20 range and goes up from there. There are exceptions. A really, really rare coin may be incredibly valuable and important, even in those really low grades. But for the most part, for the Morgan Dollar series, collectors are going to want to see at least a very fine 20. Remember, that's the combination of the adjectival grade of very fine and the Sheldon grade of 20. It makes sense when you start getting used to it. So I like to start by looking at the lowest grade and see if my coin corresponds to the lowest grade. And if it does, I check that one off and I keep on going till it reaches a point where it can't go any higher. I like to say, be conservative when you start grading your own coins. It doesn't do you any good to try to squeeze a higher grade out of the condition of your coin if that's genuinely not there. It doesn't do you any good. It doesn't make the coin any more valuable. It just makes your estimation of the value of the coin inaccurate. So let's go conservative as we can. The very fine 20. 2/3 of the hairlines from the top of the forehead to the ear are visible, ear well defined, and feathers on eagle breast worn. So we can see Liberty's ear right there. That's pretty well defined. And then the hair going up here, I actually think that they're probably about right. That seems to be about 2/3 of the amount of hair. It's really tricky if you don't have a nice example of an uncirculated piece where you can see all those hair pieces there, but you see how well struck and how specifically identified each one of those strands of hair is. Now let's compare it to our example of Liberty over here. You can see just how worn that hair is. Again, the hair is one of the highest features on the coin, so that's what gets worn away first as the coin goes through circulation. So I'm actually going to stop right there. Let's check one grade higher and see if this is accurate. Remember, it said the eagle's breast is well worn. I would say that's pretty well worn. Let's compare it to the eagle breast on our uncirculated example once again. And you can see the feathers on the example here on the left on the breast of the eagle and the neck of the eagle versus our example here. They are so well worn that you cannot identify the individual feathers at all. Let's go one higher and see if we can squeeze one more grade out. In this case, that would be the extremely fine 40 on that Sheldon scale. All hairlines strong and ear bold. Eagle's feathers all plain, but with slight wear on the breast and wings. I don't think we're quite going to get there because we can't see those individual feathers. And if you're looking at this wing up here, you see how this area right here is particularly well worn. You can't even see the individual feather lines. Again, let's compare that to our example here. And you can see the individual lines on the wing there. So our example down below and the uncirculated example, you can see just how well defined those feathers are. So I don't think our coin makes it up to the EF40 grade. And remember, I said, let's be conservative. It doesn't do you any good to trick yourself to thinking that this coin is an EF40 because it's not. So let's try to find this piece. Now that we think that this is probably a VF20 and it's an 1881 and it's a New Orleans mint mark, you'd simply go to the coins and we'll look down till we get to the chronologically 1881, which is right here. And we see that 1881 has several entries. This is a CC, that's a mint mark, right? That stands for Carson City, Nevada. No longer in operation, but Carson City did not produce that many silver dollars, so the Carson City dollars tend to be the pieces that a lot of collectors really want. And then we also have an O, that's our coin with the New Orleans mint mark, and they were also made in San Francisco. The one at the top is 1881 without a mint mark. Remember, that means Philadelphia. So how do they differ in terms of value? Well, you can see just how many pieces were made. That's the first line in our column here. It's mintage. We're going down to 1881. They made 9 million plus in Philadelphia, but they only made 296,000 in Carson City. So again, the combination of date and mint mark shows you the mintage difference. And then you're looking across at the value, and that's based on the grades. Remember, we said our piece was a VF20. So we have an 1881 New Orleans mint and it was a VF20 coin, which means the red book indicates that it's worth $48. So in the higher valued coins, the dollar value is expressed in dollars in American currency. Sometimes in the lower valued coins, you'll see those expressed in terms of cents. That doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, the red book is going to give you a price in dollars. $48 for our 1881 New Orleans Morgan dollar in very fine 20 condition. That's not so bad, right? It's not that difficult to use once you get used to it. Let's look at the difference in price for those mint marks, because I said that that was just as crucial. You can see that a condition of a very fine 20 from Carson City is $450, literally 10 times the value of the other pieces made from other mints with a much higher mintage. And you can see that most of the time the coins will fall into relatively close range of their value. It's really only the smaller mintage made it a very desirable mint that is going to have a much higher dollar value. One of the things that I like about the Red Book is that you can look at the wide array of pieces and immediately tell if your date and mint mark is rare compared to everything else that was made at approximately the same time. It's a great way to pick out those key dates, those mint marks and the dates that really do have value when you're looking at a big collection. Let's take a look at one other piece here. We're looking at a Walking Liberty half dollar. This one dated 1918, so this is a very early Walking Liberty half dollar. You can see Liberty walking with her arm reached out in a beautiful sun here in the background, the sunset. On the back, we have another eagle, great big fierce looking eagle, right? So this is a pretty nice example of a Walking Liberty half dollar, you might think at least, compared to, well, not having anything else to compare it to. Let's compare this to a piece that is not as well circulated, just like we did with the Morgan dollar. And again, once you see these pieces compared side to side, you can start to really pick out the detail that's still present on our coin that is in much better state of preservation compared to this. Now we see a very well-worn 1918 silver half dollar. Looking at the back, and this is an important characteristic too, we're going to look at the eagle, and we're going to look at the feathers here above the eagle's head there, and these eagles in back, also this outstretched wing, and compare that to our better grade example, and you can see just how well defined those feathers are on our nicer condition versus this condition. You can almost not even make out the feathers here versus the feathers here, the eagle's face versus the eagle's face. It's all about the condition, how much remains from when the coin was first struck and how much has been lost from circulation. Doesn't matter how shiny, how bright the coin is. This coin is actually somewhat dark in terms of its tone, but it's a natural tone. This is what silver looks like after 80 years. So this piece definitely has more wear on it. Let's go ahead and try to grade our nicer example versus our earlier example that's seen some wear. But I wanted to point out one other thing. We're looking down below, and the Red Book will tell us exactly to look for the mint mark, but I know that the mint mark for the Walking Liberty half dollar series is generally right there. Sometimes we changed where the mint mark was. Early pieces may have a mint mark somewhere else. This one has a small S. That stands for San Francisco. So let's take a look at our piece, and before we get into the Red Book, I'll show you where that mint mark was supposed to be, right there, and you can see that it is an absent a mint mark, which means once again this is a Philadelphia strike. So we know that this is a 1942. We know that it's a Philadelphia coin. Let's see what the Red Book has to tell us about the Walking Liberty half dollar. Now, since we're in Morgan dollars, we'll go backwards till we get to half dollars, and we happen to land on the Walking Liberty half dollar. And we'll go through the grading process of these also. Franklin. And then there's Walking Liberty. They call it Liberty Walking, but it's the same idea, right? And once again, it does tell us where that mint mark location is. The very early ones, it was on the front of the coin. The later ones, it was right where we showed you before on the back of the coin. So it tells us all the information about how to grade this piece. Let's start really low, and we'll work our way up like we did with the Morgan dollars. The very lowest version that they have for the Walking Liberty is the good 4. That's a very low coin. Rim's defined motto of "In God We Trust" is legible. That's the "In God We Trust." We can clearly see that. So we know our piece is at least that good. Let's see if we can get it to another higher level. The very good 8, motto distinct, about half of the skirt lines at left clear. Well, her skirt lines are all quite clear on this coin. Not only can you see the definition of the skirt, but you can see the individual layers of fabric as it attests right here, these straight lines. And then we've got just a really nice example of the In God We Trust. It clearly gets to very good. Let's go to very fine, our fine 12. All skirt lines evident, but worn in spots. Clear details in sandal below motto. I think the skirt lines are very crisply defined here still. The sandal that she's wearing right there below the motto, In God We Trust, it's a little bit tricky to see on my phone, but you can see the detail there is quite sharp on her sandal. So I think we get up to the next level. Very fine 20. Skirt line sharp, including leg area, little wear on the breast and right arm. Her right arm is the outstretched arm there, and I don't see any wear on it. We do have a little bit of flatness in the breast. I don't think that's really due to wear. I think that's probably from the coins pressing up against each other in the coin tube over years. So I would be okay going up maybe one more example. Let's take it to EF 40. That's extremely fine 40. Nearly all gown lines visible. I think we're okay there. Could we take it any higher than this? The nice thing about the Red Book is that it does have the QR code. Let me see if I can find it. For each of these series, where you can actually go to, well, maybe not each of the series, but there are QR codes where you can look up the individual coins, and the Red Book will actually tell you how to grade these pieces. There's an example of it there. They'll go through the process in a much, much more detailed style, so you can really pick up on these. You don't have to use one word. It will show you examples, high-resolution images of all of these pieces. PCGS and NGC also contain that kind of information. I'll put links to those down below. But I think our piece is a very nice, extremely fine. When we get into about uncirculated, slight trace of wear on Liberty's head, knee, and breast, and on Eagle's claw and head. Does ours really meet that definition? Let's go ahead and flip it over and look at the Eagle's claw. Well, I think that we might even make it all the way up into the AU guidelines, because there's the Eagle's claw, and I still see pretty good definition down there. Can you see that? I think we're probably okay. Do we want to push it? MS60 uncirculated, no trace of wear, light blemishes. That is not our piece. Our piece definitely has some wear. You can see a little bit of weakness in the Eagle's feathers right here, and there's just really light traces of wear. So the line between the about uncirculated coins and the uncirculated coins is very well defined, and that's really when we get into those high collector grades. Our piece would not go all the way up to 60, so I'm good with somewhere in the range of 50. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a 50. Remember, we said in those adjectival phrases of about uncirculated, the coin could be at the very low end. In the case of the AU coins, the about uncirculated, that would start at 50, and it would go all the way up to 58. Another idiosyncrasy of the grading scale is that we don't use the number 56, we don't use 57, we don't use 59. At some point in the future, we may. But for right now, we use 50, 53, 55, and 58. I'd say that this may be even a 53 or a 55. Let's see what it has to say in terms of pricing. We know that it's a 42, and we know that it was made in Philadelphia. We're looking chronologically, and we get down to 42, and we see once again that these pieces were struck in Denver and San Francisco, but they're also struck in Philadelphia. Just want to double check and make sure that we're at the 42 date, right? 1942 down below. So our example of a 42 Philadelphia, they made, what's this in brackets? The brackets once again indicates the proof coins. So in 1942, it was the Philadelphia Mint that struck these proof pieces. Our piece is not a proof. While there are different types of proof for the most part in the United States, our proof coins are going to look like this. Our coin definitely doesn't have those mirrored fields and frosted devices, so we know that ours is a business strike. You don't encounter the proofs very often unless it's designated. You're buying it from a dealer already as a proof. We just don't find them very often in circulation. So we're excluding these. We're not interested in these, but we find out that our coin was made in numbers that are super high. You see 47,818,000. That is higher than almost any other mintage that was made in this entire series. 1942 Philadelphia, but we think our piece may be somewhere in the AU range. So we're going to drop down on our column to AU, and we're going to go across from 42, and that means our piece is worth, I believe, $22 according to the guidebook. So $22. That's not bad. It's a nicer state of preservation. The thing to remember is that when you're looking at the prices in the Red Book, this is the dealer's retail price. So this is probably what the dealer would sell the coin to you at. Now, in reality, that's what the Red Book was designed originally to be, but now dealers use something like the Gray Sheet, which is a periodical that comes out, but it's also a website that dealers use. You have to have a membership to even look at what the Gray Sheet prices are. There was an old school book that kind of gave what the dealers were going to pay you for a piece, and that's the Blue Book. But like I said, in the age of technology that we are in now, dealers don't really use the Red Book anymore. Sometimes the dealer uses their gut, sometimes they use instinct, sometimes they use their experience. Often they use a recently completed online auction. That's what I find myself using when I want to find the pricing as close as I can possibly get it. But the prices that you see in the Red Book are theoretically those retail prices that the dealer is going to charge you. So could we buy these pieces for the prices we looked up? We might be able to buy them, but when it came time to sell, you have to remember the dealer is going to offer you significantly less than those prices. These are the retail prices, not the wholesale or the buying prices. So a great example of how to use the Red Book, once you get used to the idea, it really becomes second nature. And again, I use my Red Book on a continuous basis. I look at it 2 or 3 times a day. It's sitting next to me at the desk all day long. When I want to look at the series of a coin, if I want to look just how many years that coin was made, if I want to try to find the key dates of the coin easily, I like looking at this great big database that's all in one spot that I can just glance over and look at with my eyes, rather than pulling up the individual dates and mint marks that you might find on some websites. I find the Red Book is really, really handy too, again, if you are a stacker, because as we were seeing there, as we were looking at some of the Morgan dollar pricing, let's see if I can pull it up again. The Red Book also tells you some very critical information when it comes time to decide whether or not a piece is authentic. And primarily, I'm looking at the diameter of the coin. This is the Morgan dollar. It tells us exactly what the diameter is, and it also tells us what the weight of the coin is. If you have an inexpensive pair of calipers, electronic calipers is what I like to use, and you have a very inexpensive digital scale, you can compare the diameter of a piece and the weight of the piece. And again, they'll list this for every single coin that's ever been made in the United States. And that really helps you determine whether or not something is authentic. It's not the end all be all, but if you can screen out 75 or 80% of the really bad fakes because they won't be these dimensions, the weight and the diameter, this is a great tool and something that I reference constantly. As a stacker, if you're looking at the precious metal content, they also tell you that too. They tell you the composition. In this case, it's 900 silver and 100 copper, which means 90% silver and 10% copper. And then they tell you the weight in pure silver. In the case of the Morgan dollars, it's 0.77344 troy ounces of pure silver. Invaluable information if you are a stacker, and a great way to get you some information when you start trying to screen out those pieces that are potentially counterfeits. Great information, always useful. It's not very expensive. Once you get used to it, it's very easy to use. And if you start to go deeper into coin collecting and you're not just looking at the cents, the nickels, the dimes, the quarters, the half dollars, you can go as deep as you want to and look at every single issue that has ever been made by the United States, from those colonial pieces to the bullion pieces and everything in between. An invaluable resource. I cannot stress enough how important it is not just to get a copy of the Red Book, but to really spend some time learning how to use it. I love my Red Book. If you have questions about anything that we talked about here today, by all means, leave a question down below. You guys who are subscribers to the channel already, is there some trick that you use when you're using the Red Book? How often do you reference it? I get a new Red Book every year, but honestly, a lot of the information, like the mintages, the compositions, those things don't change on a year-to-year basis. So there's no reason that you necessarily have to buy one every year. I just kind of make it a habit of getting a new one every year. Again, the word of caution, when we're looking at the prices of these pieces, the prices become obsolete the second they are printed on a piece of paper. That's why it's handy to be able to use a website that has recent auction closes, so you can tell just how much the pieces are selling for right this instant, as opposed to something that may have been printed months or weeks or even years ago. But it's a good idea to have these prices because you can see the relative scarcity, even if the price isn't exact. it will tell you how much the piece is worth compared to other pieces in that series. And I find that to be just as valuable as looking up the exact price, which is pretty easy to do if you know how to use a website. Again, I'll put some links down below. If you've got questions about anything that we talked about here, leave a question down below. I'll try to answer your question. It's a good idea to look through those questions because maybe there is a question that you have that you hadn't thought of. Let's see if we can answer those questions for everybody. I try to premiere new videos every Friday evening, and I'm usually right there when we're watching the premiere to answer questions, to talk with you. But more importantly, we go live after almost every one of those those video premieres on Friday evenings. The live stream is a much more energetic and a fun way to communicate with other people in the stacking community. You'll find lots of people joining in the conversation. It's a great way for me to respond directly to your questions and comments. I love the live streams. It really makes a great opportunity to ask a little bit more information about what we just talked about in the premiere video, but the floor is wide open. If you've got a question or a comment about precious metals or rare coins, this is the venue to ask that in. It's a lot of fun, fast-paced. I really like those live streams. Click on the notification bell and the subscription button to find out when the next video premiere is and when the live stream is that follows. I like to end my videos by saying, always be learning. And I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.